December 19th, 1944. 06:27 hours. A low fog clung to the Ardennes, muting the rumble of retreating supply trucks and the groans of wounded men. Inside the steel belly of a German Panzer IV, Lieutenant Karl Weber strained his ears. For a moment there was silence. Then it came. A thin, high-pitched whine, cutting through the morning haze like a banshee's wail. His loader froze, eyes darting toward the mist. Every man in the crew knew what that sound meant. The American's Hellcat was near, and they had less than 4 minutes to react before the Phantom vanished at speeds no tank commander had trained for. The M18 Hellcat did not fight like a tiger or panther. Its armor was laughably thin, its silhouette tall, its open turret exposed crews to shrapnel and frost. Yet the very flaws became its deadliest weapons. Instead of slugging it out in a duel, the Hellcat arrived like a lightning strike, firing a single armor-piercing round, then disappearing down a frozen road at 55 miles per hour before German gunners could traverse their turrets. For panzer crews conditioned to fight lumbering Shermans and Churchills, this was warfare turned upside down. Half a continent away, in Flint, Michigan, Buick's assembly lines churned out these radical machines by the thousands. To the untrained eye, the M18 seemed fragile, even reckless, But American doctrine had shifted. Speed, surprise, and coordinated firepower would matter more than armor thickness. In the Ardennes, that gamble was paying off in blood and steel. For Weber's crew, those minutes felt eternal. Orders were shouted. The turret groaned, gears protesting in the cold. Then came the crack of a 76mm round. Sparks erupted across the glacis plate of a Tiger parked 200 meters away. A second later, the wine was gone, vanishing into the woods, leaving only smoke and shattered nerves. The Hellcat's genius lay in this rhythm: appear, strike, vanish. By the time Germans registered the threat, the Predator had already melted into the fog. Doctrine was collapsing under the weight of speed. And before we continue this story of the fastest tank destroyer of the war, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and join us as we uncover how the Hellcat rewrote the battlefield's rules. The M18 Hellcat's journey began not on the battlefield, but inside the Buick Motor Division plant in Flint, Michigan. It was 1943, and America's war industry was running at full throttle. Engineers at Buick faced an impossible assignment: design a tank destroyer light enough to outrun anything the Germans could field, yet armed with a cannon powerful enough to pierce even a Panther's front plate under the right conditions. The result would be the fastest armored fighting vehicle of the Second World War. At the heart of the Hellcat was the Wright R-975 radial engine, an aircraft-derived power plant producing 400 horsepower. This was no ordinary tank engine. Combined with torsion bar suspension and lightweight armor plating, it propelled the 20-ton Hellcat to a top speed of 55 miles per hour, faster than most cars of its era. The speed was not just a statistic, it was a doctrine carved into steel. American strategists believed mobility would outweigh brute force, allowing Hellcats to strike, reposition, and vanish before German gunners could respond. But speed came at a price. The Hellcat's armor, a mere inch thick at its strongest point, was thinner than even German reconnaissance vehicles. Its turret was open-topped, exposing crews to shrapnel, snipers, and the elements. Critics inside the Army warned that the design bordered on reckless. Yet Buick pressed on, producing 2,507 of these machines between 1943 and 1944. Their gamble was simple. Mobility was protection. If the Hellcat was never where the enemy's shells landed, its thin armor mattered little. Crews assigned to the M18 were drilled relentlessly at Camp Hood, Texas, where tank destroyer doctrine was perfected. They learned not to duel but to ambush, using terrain, speed, and timing to their advantage. Exercises emphasized the shoot and scoot, fire once, relocate immediately, and trust that speed would save lives. This training created a new breed of armored warrior, one who thrived on initiative and aggression. By late 1944, these doctrines would be tested in the crucible of Europe. German tank commanders, used to deliberate battles of attrition, suddenly faced adversaries who refused to stand still. And as the Ardennes erupted into chaos, the Hellcat's reputation spread, not as a tank, but as a phantom that came screaming through the fog, struck with surgical precision, and was gone before retaliation could find it. For German Panzer crews, combat against the M18 Hellcat could be measured in minutes. Reports from the 2nd Panzer Division described a chilling pattern. By the time a Hellcat's whine was detected, crews had roughly 4 minutes to locate, aim, and fire before the destroyer was gone. In the brutal arithmetic of war, 4 minutes was no time at all. Panzer commanders were trained to exploit their tanks' advantages: thick frontal armor, long-barreled guns, and overwhelming firepower in set-piece duels. Yet the Hellcat refused to play by these rules. Instead of approaching head-on, it attacked from angles where armor was weaker. Instead of slugging it out, it fired 1 or 2 rounds before vanishing into tree lines or narrow roads. This inverted the German advantage, forcing men in heavily armored beasts to feel like prey. At Bastogne, where the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion deployed its Hellcats in support of the surrounded 101st Airborne, the psychological toll on German crews was immense. Diaries recovered after the battle reveal accounts of tankers cursing the fast American shadows that appeared and disappeared before their gunners could traverse turrets. One officer lamented that a King Tiger's massive 80mm gun was useless if it couldn't be aimed fast enough at a target that moved like a ghost across open fields. The 4-minute window was not an official statistic, but a lived experience. Crews knew instinctively they had that slim margin before a Hellcat slipped away. Under pressure, mistakes multiplied: rushed firing solutions, miscommunication, even premature withdrawals. For every destroyed Hellcat, several German tanks fell victim to its precision strikes. American crews understood this psychological edge and exploited it ruthlessly. They coordinated ambushes in pairs or platoons, each Hellcat darting into position, firing, and vanishing as others maneuvered. This fluidity created illusions of larger forces at work, convincing German commanders they faced more enemy armor than was actually present. The brilliance lay not in armor or gun size, but in time itself. The Hellcat compressed the decision-making cycle, robbing German crews of the deliberation they relied upon. 4 minutes of chaos was all it needed to break formations, sow panic, and tip engagements in America's favor. What began as a desperate gamble by Buick engineers in Flint had become a nightmare etched into the memories of Panzer veterans, proof that in war, sometimes minutes decide legacies. December 1944, Bastogne was a frozen fortress. Encircled by German forces during the Battle of the Bulge, the 101st Airborne Division fought desperately to hold the crossroads town. Reinforcing them was the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats that would earn an immortal reputation in those snow-covered fields. Against overwhelming German armor, including Panthers and Tigers, the 705th relied not on brute strength, but on mobility and guile. The battalion deployed its Hellcats in concealed positions along forest edges and road junctions, waiting for enemy columns to blunder into range. When the moment came, the destroyers struck like coiled vipers, 76mm rounds piercing side armor, tracks, and exposed flanks. Within seconds, engines roared, and the Hellcats vanished into new cover, leaving burning hulks behind. The results were staggering. In a matter of days, the 705th destroyed 40 German tanks while losing only 6 Hellcats. This kill-to-loss ratio, nearly 7-to-1 in that engagement, showcased the doctrine's effectiveness. More importantly, it bought precious time for the surrounded paratroopers, denying the Wehrmacht its chance to break through Bastogne's defenses. For German crews, the battle was a waking nightmare. The speed of the Hellcats mocked their ponderous machines. King Tigers bogged down in snow and mud. Their immense weight sinking into ground, the M18 skimmed across with ease. One German account described the sound of an approaching Hellcat as a scream of death, the whine of its radial engine followed by the sudden impact of steel on steel. By the time commanders oriented their turrets, the enemy was gone, leaving wreckage smoldering in the snow. American crews paid a price. Exposure in open-top turrets meant frostbite, shell fragments, and sniper fire haunted every mission. Yet their discipline held firm. Drilled at Camp Hood, they executed shoot-and-scoot tactics with machine-like precision, never lingering to duel, always trusting speed as their shield. The defense of Bastogne was more than a tactical victory. It became the Hellcats' proving ground, the moment when skeptics of the thin-skinned destroyer fell silent. In the freezing forests of the Ardennes, the M18 demonstrated that speed could anchor a defense as effectively as armor. Bastogne was not just a stand, it was the stage on which the Hellcat earned its legend. September 1944. The Lorraine region of France lay blanketed in morning fog, visibility shrinking to mere yards. For the German 5th Panzer Army, this was an opportunity. Fresh Panther and Panzer IV units prepared to smash through the thin American lines near Arracourt. But in that fog waited the 4th Armored Division's tank destroyer battalions, their M18 Hellcats poised for one of the most lopsided ambushes of the war. The battle unfolded like a chess match played in half-light. German tanks advanced cautiously, confident their superior optics and firepower would prevail once contact was made. Yet the fog betrayed them. Hellcat crews, trained to stalk in silence, maneuvered into flanking positions undetected. When the Panthers finally appeared as blurred silhouettes, American gunners were already sighted in. The crack of 76mm fire echoed through the mist, tearing into armor at ranges the Germans thought safe. Speed gave the Hellcats dominance in terrain where visibility limited heavy armor's advantage. They darted across ridges, repositioned through hidden lanes, and struck from multiple directions before slipping away. Panthers lumbered forward, their commanders blind and disoriented, often firing at phantom targets. The fog magnified the Hellcats' deadliest quality, unpredictability. Over several days of fighting, the Americans inflicted devastating losses. Nearly 285 German tanks and assault guns were destroyed or disabled during the Arracourt engagements, compared to far lighter U.S. casualties. Though Sherman's bore much of the battle, the Hellcats' role was decisive. Their speed and ambush tactics multiplied American striking power, making numerically inferior units appear overwhelming. German reports reveal bitter frustration. One officer wrote that his men fought shadows, describing how tanks were knocked out from flanks and rear before they even knew the Hellcats were present. The doctrine of armored superiority, built on the premise of frontal duels, was being dismantled by machines that refused to fight on those terms. For the Hellcat crews, Arracourt proved their doctrine's value. The vehicle's thin armor meant mistakes could be fatal, but discipline, teamwork, and mobility turned vulnerability into advantage. In that swirling fog, Buick's radical design validated itself beyond doubt. Arracourt became another scar on Germany's armored reputation and another chapter in the Hellcats' rise to legendary status. It was no longer a controversial experiment. It was the embodiment of a new way of war. The M18 Hellcat was more than a battlefield phenomenon. It was a mechanical gamble brought to life by American industry. At Buick's Flint plant in Michigan, where automobile assembly lines once produced sedans, engineers reimagined speed as armor. They stripped weight wherever possible, shaving steel until the vehicle's profile seemed fragile compared to German counterparts. To many skeptics, the design looked suicidal, yet beneath its thin plates lay brilliance. At its core was the Wright R-975 radial engine, borrowed from aviation. This 9-cylinder powerhouse delivered 400 horsepower to a vehicle weighing barely 20 tons. The result was a power-to-weight ratio unmatched by any other tank destroyer of the war, nearly 20 horsepower per ton. On paper, it meant highway speeds. In practice, it meant the Hellcat could outmaneuver anything Germany fielded. Panthers and Tigers were built for power, but the M18 was built for movement. The suspension system, inspired by advances in torsion bar technology, allowed the Hellcat to glide over rough terrain at speeds that would tear apart other armored vehicles. Even its ground pressure was revolutionary, just 10.5 pounds per square inch. In muddy fields where 70-ton King Tigers sank helplessly, the Hellcat skimmed across like a sports car hugging pavement. Terrain, once the ally of heavy armor, became a playground for this American predator. Armament was no afterthought. The 76mm M1A2 gun, firing M62 APCBC and M93 HVAP rounds, gave crews the ability to penetrate German armor at realistic combat ranges. It was not about matching an 80mm cannon shot for shot, but about delivering precise, timely strikes before retreating. The gun's versatility made it equally effective against infantry, light vehicles, and hardened tanks, ensuring the Hellcat could adapt to shifting battlefield demands. Still, the trade-offs were stark. Crews endured exposure in open-top turrets. A single artillery fragment or strafing aircraft could turn a Hellcat into a coffin. Armor so thin that even heavy machine gun fire posed risks demanded unwavering discipline. Protection was sacrificed on the promise that speed alone could shield men. It was a philosophy alien to German design, but it embodied the American belief in initiative, mass production, and aggressive doctrine. Buick's engineers had not just built a vehicle. They had created a paradox, fragile yet deadly, vulnerable yet untouchable. On Europe's battlefields, this paradox was rewriting the rules of armored warfare. Machines alone do not win battles. Crews do. The Hellcat's success was not only in its engineering, but also in the men trained to exploit its strengths. At Camp Hood, Texas, the crucible of America's tank destroyer force, young soldiers were transformed into hunters built for speed, precision, and relentless aggression. Unlike traditional tank training, where crews drilled in static defense or armored duels, Hellcat crews learned a different philosophy: strike first, move fast, and never linger. Exercises emphasized ambush tactics. Units practiced slipping into concealed positions, waiting for imaginary enemy columns, and then executing the shoot and scoot. Seconds after firing, engines roared to life, crews sprinting to alternate firing points before a counterstrike could arrive. Timing and coordination mattered as much as marksmanship. The training was unforgiving. Open-topped turrets left men exposed during mock artillery barrages. Instructors hammered home the reality that hesitation meant death. Gunners drilled to acquire targets in under 5 seconds. Drivers mastered gear shifts at breakneck speed, learning to handle the Hellcat as though it were a racing machine. Radios crackled with constant orders as commanders synchronized platoons to appear larger than they were, creating illusions of massed armor. Psychological conditioning was equally important. Soldiers were taught to embrace the paradox of their vehicle. They were protected not by steel, but by velocity. This demanded courage, even recklessness. Confidence in speed had to replace the instinct to stand and fight. Veterans recalled instructors repeating a mantra: "If you're hit, you stayed too long." That mindset, drilled into every crewman, became doctrine. Graduates of Camp Hood entered Europe with this aggressive spirit. They were not defensive tankers but predators, restless, opportunistic, and fast-thinking. When placed against German formations, they acted less like conventional tank units and more like cavalry, striking from concealment, breaking off, and circling for new attacks. The effect on the battlefield was profound. German crews who expected American tanks to slug it out found instead adversaries who vanished before a countershot could be fired. The training ensured that Hellcats lived up to their design. Thin armor and open turrets could have spelled disaster, but with disciplined doctrine, crews turned fragility into invincibility. In many ways, Camp Hood was as important to the Hellcat's legend as Buick's factory. It forged men who understood that their greatest protection was time itself, and that 4 minutes was all they needed to change the course of a battle. To understand the Hellcat's impact, one must step into the vision blocks of a German Panzer. Inside the cramped steel chamber, the air reeked of fuel and sweat as crews strained to spot threats through narrow slits. Against Shermans or Churchills, this routine felt manageable. The enemy advanced predictably, armor heavy and movements slow. But when M18 Hellcats appeared, the rhythm of battle disintegrated. German reports tell of frustration bordering on despair. A Panther commander near Clairvaux described how his formation was sliced apart by wolves too fast to chase. Another noted that the M18's whine arrived suddenly, followed by the crack of a gun, and then silence. "We fired at ghosts," he wrote, recalling duels where no target remained by the time turrets swung into position. The Panther and Tiger were designed to dominate frontal confrontations. Their massive 75mm and 88mm guns could obliterate Allied tanks at a mile's distance. Yet these advantages evaporated when speed collapsed the timeline. Hellcats closed the gap from ambush points, firing into flanks where armor was weakest. The 4-minute window became a psychological weapon. Every second ticked louder inside the minds of German crews, knowing the Hellcat would vanish before they could respond. Terrain compounded the nightmare. In the Ardennes, snow and mud, Panthers bogged down while Hellcats skimmed past with their low ground pressure. King Tigers, icons of indestructibility, were stranded like monuments as Hellcats circled and struck with impunity. In forests and villages where mobility was everything, German superiority melted away. This inversion of doctrine rattled seasoned tankers. Many had fought since Poland and France, relying on the confidence that their armor was unmatched. Now they were forced into reactive roles, scanning nervously for fleeting shadows. A machine that should have been laughable, a thin-skinned vehicle with an open turret, was instead dictating tempo across entire sectors. Historians later noted the irony. German engineering, obsessed with perfection and invulnerability, was undone by an American design that embraced imperfection. The Hellcat did not pretend to be invincible. It simply refused to be where the enemy struck. For German crews, that lesson was learned not in classrooms, but in burning hulks left behind on roadsides and fields. From their perspective, the Hellcat was not just another enemy vehicle. It was time itself, distilled into 4 fleeting, terrifying minutes. The M18 Hellcat's battlefield dominance was not only a triumph of design and training, it was also a product of American industrial philosophy. Between July 1943 and October 1944, Buick's Flint plant produced 2,507 Hellcats, a fraction of the projected 8,986. Yet these vehicles arrived at the front in precise, predictable streams that German planners could not match. For every Panther or King Tiger lost, multiple replacements could be dispatched without delay. American production emphasized speed and practicality over perfection. Welds were functional, not ornamental. Interiors were Spartan. Armor plates bore tool marks. To engineers accustomed to German meticulousness, the Hellcat seemed crude. Yet every simplification had a purpose. Lighter vehicles meant greater mobility, faster deployment, and easier maintenance. Mechanics could repair engines, replace tracks, or troubleshoot radios in hours instead of days. This industrial rhythm created strategic flexibility. While German heavy tanks sat immobilized, waiting for spare parts or fuel, M18s were already moving to exploit new weaknesses. Logistic superiority, combined with standardized components and efficient supply chains, ensured that Hellcat battalions operated at peak effectiveness, even in the harshest conditions of Europe's winter. Red Ball Express convoys and field repair units meant that tanks never waited for the battlefield to come to them. They dictated where engagements occurred. Numbers also shaped doctrine. German commanders, aware of the Hellcat's capabilities, hesitated to commit armor without reconnaissance, slowing their tempo and ceding initiative. The mere presence of M18s forced enemy units into defensive postures, squandering offensive potential. Reports from Bastogne and the Ruhr pocket indicate hours of operational paralysis, where commanders requested confirmation of Hellcat locations before advancing. Strategically, this meant that even a relatively small force of lightly armored destroyers could achieve effects disproportionate to their numbers. The combination of speed, reliability, and abundant production created a multiplier that German heavy armor could not overcome. Each destroyed Panther or Tiger was a tactical victory. Each operational Hellcat was a strategic one. In essence, the M18 exemplified the American approach to war: practical, flexible, and fast. While Germany sought perfection in design, the United States leveraged quantity, mobility, and doctrine to turn the battlefield into a dynamic environment, where speed could outgun strength and initiative outmaneuver armor. December 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The winter chill bit through uniforms, the air filled with the stench of fuel, smoke, and steel. German armored formations, confident in their Panthers and King Tigers, were suddenly confronted by an enemy that moved like lightning and vanished before retaliation. For most Panzer crews, 4 minutes was all they had to survive. 4 minutes from the sound of the high-pitched whine to the impact of 76mm rounds. And then, the Hellcat was gone. The M18 had proven that speed could be armor, initiative could be firepower, and doctrine could outweigh engineering perfection. At Bastogne, the 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion alone destroyed 40 German tanks while losing only 6 of their own. Elsewhere, similar results validated the doctrine of seek, strike, and destroy. The combination of mobility, training, and coordinated attacks shattered German expectations. Armored superiority was no longer guaranteed by weight and frontal armor. It could be dictated by tempo and cunning. The legacy extended beyond the battlefield. Post-war studies in Europe and the United States identified the Hellcat as the first true embodiment of the tank destroyer concept. A vehicle meant not to slug it out, but to hunt. Its speed, reinforced by a robust supply chain, allowed it to exploit terrain, weather, and enemy doctrine simultaneously. The lessons learned informed future armored tactics. Mobility and initiative could overcome brute force, and properly trained crews could multiply the effectiveness of a seemingly fragile vehicle. Even today, Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, displays a restored M18 Hellcat at the Armor School entrance, a silent testament to innovation, courage, and doctrine over raw strength. Military historians note that the Hellcat's success was not in perfection, but in pragmatism. It was a machine built for a war that demanded speed, not weight, intelligence, not invulnerability. For the German crews who faced them, the experience was a harsh education. Their Panthers and Tigers, engineering marvels, had been outmatched not by superior technology, but by superior strategy and execution. The 4-minute window that the Hellcat imposed became legendary, enough to destroy, disappear, and strike again, reshaping armored warfare forever. In the end, the M18 Hellcat is more than a vehicle. It is proof that the right combination of innovation, training, and audacity can turn apparent weakness into unstoppable power. Speed was life, and in those fleeting 4 minutes, it spelled the difference between survival and annihilation on the frozen fields of Europe.